Hey guys, this is going to be the first of 3 videos involving lists, and let's jump into it. So, lists in OCAML are a series or a collection of different elements. So, an example is, don't worry about the notation right now, I'll go over it in a second. So, we have like a list, and it's like 1, 2, 3. We have 3 different elements, and they are all in a consecutive order. So essentially a list is just a grouping of elements. Now we can have integer lists, string lists, Boolean lists, you name it, we can have it. So let's go over first of all how to form a list. So a list, whatever elements are in a list, are going to be encapsulated by the bracket signs, opening and closing brackets, and we just separate our values by different, by a semicolon. So if I want to have a list of 1, I want to have a list of 2, and I want to have a list of 3. So we have 3 elements separated by a semicolon. And most other programming languages use a comma to separate elements. So that's a list. We can have an empty list. That's cool. We can have a list of 1 element. Also cool. This is a syntax error, so watch out for this. You can't really do... Oh, I think you can actually do that. Sorry. You can have a semicolon and no trailing value. Let's go over the types of lists. So I can have a list of integers, like I showed you there. I can have, and you can see in OCaml Pro, it tells you integer list. I can have a list of floats. That gives us a float list. I can have a list of booleans, and it'll tell us like bool list, and it did. However, I can't really mix types, so I can't say 1 and 1.2. This will not work because remember, 1's an integer, 1.2 is a floating type, or any decimal value involved, and that's that worked because I didn't use a semicolon, right? So we'll get to it, but the comma in OCaml is used for something far different, and I made a mistake there. But yeah, so if we do this right here, don't worry about this. We'll obviously get that to a future video. But right here we have 1 and 1.2 separated by a semicolon, and that is not a valid list. Sorry, clear is not here. Okay. We could talk about evaluating expressions in a list. We could have I can't type. It's so unfortunate. 1 plus 2. We could have 5 times 9, and these are all going to be integers, so it's going to evaluate to an integer list. And beauty of functional programming is it goes in, evaluates the values, and then it returns it out as a list. Now we can jump into the cons operator. So lists are pretty cool, but how do I how do I add to lists? So like variables, we can also have a variable that's a list. So let x be an int list, and of course it's always great practice to declare the type of your variable, but OCaml can figure it out. It's a smart programming language. So there we go. Oh wait, I screwed that one up. Oh, sorry about that. When you're declaring a variable, I guess you don't indicate what type of. Well, I misspelled it. That's absolutely why. That was an error. Sorry about that. There we go. Yeah, no, don't listen to me. What I was saying, I just misspelled the word list. So we can also add things to lists, right? Having just one list is boring. So I could say, hey, I want to add the value 1 to that list, and at the beginning would be pretty cool. So I say 2, 3, 4, and I do 1, and this double colon operation is called cons. It essentially prepends to lists, so it adds to the beginning of a list. So I can have an empty list, and I can just add 1 to it, and it'll prepend to that. Now again, just like the rule of lists, you can't have inconsistent types. So if I want to prepend 1.2 to like an integer list, not going to work. And again, beauty of OCaml is I can just have some expressions and prepend that onto an integer list, and there we go. So with that in mind, I think we can get to pattern matching on lists. So a lot of you guys have been asking for like certain commands. You guys don't really like typing out OCaml C and OCaml run. There is a way to do that. I'm currently trying to figure that out. In Visual Studio Code, but A quick way to do is type this once, and then you can use the arrow keys to actually go up and click enter, and using the arrow keys will populate the text of the terminal, so you can go in there and run those pretty quickly. So here I have an example of pattern matching with a list. If you recall, pattern matching, it takes in a value and it'll compare different state scenarios to output a result. So I'm just saying, is the list empty? So again, we declare a list up here. Let y. I could say int list if I wanted to, with a colon, and it's equal to 1, 2, 3, and separated by semicolons. And remember, in Visual Studio Code, it's not that lenient. You will have to end with a double semicolon to indicate that you're declaring something. And here's our function. And so we say, is the list empty? We are returning an integer because we can't really print booleans that easily, so we're just going to pretend that 1 is true and 0 is false, just so we could use a print-in function. It takes in a list, which is a type int list, so just like our variable parameters for functions. Returns an integer. We do begin match with and end, and I know in previous video we just did match with. You can use begin and end to declare where a code block is taking place. So like this is like a begin and end, like represents one code block. It's very helpful when you start having more complex code and it gets all clustered. It's very simple to just have a very begin end, so you know what you're working with. Begin match L with, and we have two states. So the two states of a list are you have no elements or you have some elements. There's more. We're going to get into them. But basically, no empty means that there's just brackets and there's nothing in between. And in that case, we're going to yield a 1 or we'll return a 1. And we have this case, which is something h cons onto t. What this is saying is that there's a value at the front, and that value is h. So we could have, like, if we have the list 1, 2, 3, what this really means is it's saying that, like, 1, and then it can get cons onto the remainder of the list. So tail is t is a remainder of the list, and heads is like this one value. And of course it could be 0, right? Like tail could be 0, but at least there's a value out front here. And we can name this like anything we want. Like we could say Mike and Bob. These are just variable names, but I like using H and T just to indicate that that we are dealing with the head, and then like the tail or the remainder of the list, whatever you want, and that'll output a 0. I can run my functions, compile and run, and I get a 0. So, and then I call isListEmpty on Y, and I get a result. So that's basic pattern matching. Next video, we're going to go over the standard library of lists, and that's going to be a fun one. See you guys in the next video.